And our unique situation with, small schools and some of that.
Green. Everyone see the PowerPoint okay? Okay. I think we have some new faces here today, so that's great. Jacob, are you there?
I am. Can you see me?
Okay. Oh, yep, you're on the bottom now. You're on the top. Okay. It always moves people around with cameras. Yes, I can. Well, welcome everyone to our, gosh, is this the third or fourth session for our Chapter 57 Review and Recommendations meeting? I am, again, Crystal Andrews. I'm the Ed Licensure Director here at the OPI, and I am joined today by Jacob Williams. Jacob was with us 2 weeks ago, and then Eric took his place yesterday or last week. So Jacob, go ahead and you want to lead us off here?
Sure thing, Crystal. Good to see everybody again. Those of you who are missing Eric, he is also with us today, if you have any questions. But glad again to have everybody back. Hope everybody is winding up before the holiday weekend today so that you can take full advantage of the holiday. A couple things today. We just always, you'll see that every time we meet, we'll quickly go over our norms and expectations. We want to hear from our subcommittee on the counselor to administration path and the work that they put together. I know I saw many emails come through that there was lots of deep thought and work occurring on that language and recommendations. And then we're going to open up a discussion about reciprocity. And that's where we'll go, and we'll see what happens with that discussion. But hopefully everybody had a chance to look at the reciprocity report that was spearheaded by the Comprehensive Center to have some good ideas to help inform that conversation as we move forward. And then we'll take a look at next steps, see how we progress from here on out as we continue this work. So with that, if we can move on to the next slide. Everybody's got the chat down pat. I see everybody's muted. We're a small group today, so you may not have to raise your hand, but it is helpful on my end. That's mostly for me and Eric, just to see if I don't see your eyes that you want to speak. If you do use that raise the hand function, that really is helpful to help us know that you've got something going on. If we're voting, there's the thumbs up option that we'll use. That means if you're voting yes, we'll ask you to put the thumb up, and you'll see that's new. We had a discussion about how to best streamline that process of voting of something, and we think using the thumbs up option, which is near the raise the hand, the same at the bottom. Right? Does everybody have a thumbs up? That may not. Let's check that. I'm not sure because I only have raise a hand.
I think I only have raise a hand too.
Oh man, I saw the thumbs up. Let me see.
Well, scratch that then. We won't use a thumb because it doesn't exist.
Never mind. Sorry, I was just because we had some confusion between if somebody was actually raising their hand or voting. So I thought it would be a good, but I guess
Jacob, if you just give me a chance before we make a vote, I can make sure everyone's hands are lowered and then we can do the vote.
Okay.
Sure thing, Tristan. We can do that. And then what we will do next week is we'll move to just having a yes, no poll that we can use when it comes to voting.
Scratch that.
So, no thumbs.
Sorry, guys. I was pretty excited. Okay. Share. Oops, wrong button. I think my head's present.
Yes, Dean, we could, if we move to vote today, we certainly can use the chat as well. That gives us a record of it. So that's a good idea. We're always going to be respectful, be supportive, be present, and be open to everyone's ideas as we move forward. Thank you for everybody for acknowledging that and agreeing upon it in our first meeting that we had. And next slide. key piece here, if you're new to the group today, in the first meeting we had, we were able to determine that certainly anything that we adopt as a recommendation coming out of the task force, we would achieve via consensus. But key point is that consensus does not mean unanimous. And what we determined that consensus definition for purposes of this task force was a vote of greater than 60% or a supermajority. So in the event that we come to a decision where we don't have a clear agreement among everybody, and there are some people who are still moving back and forth, and we need, for purposes of moving the group forward, to take a vote. If that vote is in favor, greater than 60% of the group members, that's considered a consensus, and we will move on. That is our operating practice. So now, exciting stuff. Our counselor to administrator work group. I think Crystal pulled some research for us from the past year, where she identified on our next slide 4 cases where there was an administrator who, or was a counselor who was pursuing an administrator's license, but it did not have the 3 years of teaching. And 3 of those were licensed in Montana, looking for that secondary license, and 1 was from out of state. So 4 total cases that occurred. And sort of the issue we've been looking at is that path from counselor to administrator. Crystal, do you have something? I see you unmuted.
I just was going to say, this was a question that was asked, I think, last meeting, how many cases there were. So I definitely just wanted to look into the research, and this is from the licensure report that was done last year. So it's for, almost the entire year of 2020. So there, like you said, were 4, but 3 of them were that teacher experience was the reason why they could not get the license.
So we know for a fact then that these were not granted.
These were denials, correct?
Okay. And it does say denial table. If I took a chance to read that, I could see that. So there were 4 instances of it, of denials. Do we know if there were any that were granted offhand? Did you see?
No, there weren't.
Okay. So no cases were. Any questions about this before we move on from anybody? All right. So I think the next slide is our old language, or existing language, I should say. It's not old yet, it's currently existing. And I'm going to hand it over to the group, the subgroup who worked on it, because I think the next slide then is a recommendation that came out of the work that you did. So if you'd like to talk through this and see if how the group would like to move forward with it, it belongs to the subgroup. I'm looking at McCall. So McCall, if you want to assign someone else to talk or take it over yourself, go ahead.
Could I stop? McCall, I'm sorry. Are people having trouble seeing my screen? Can you see the full screen, the whole PowerPoint? Okay. Sorry, Heather. I think it might be on your end then. I can try something different, but if others aren't having issues. Sorry, McCall. Go ahead.
Okay. Seems like it's good from folks in the chat. So Tristan was kind enough to put this in a Google Doc for us. We did take the opportunity to add some additional licensure language in there. So not just 417, but there are a few others I know that will need to be looked at when we talk about an administrative endorsement. So the principal endorsements, of course, but then also the superintendent endorsement. So I don't believe this one was mine that I made changes to, but I know Sharon Carroll, who's a former educator and former chair of the Board of Public Ed, she made the changes to this one. I believe it's in line with what some of our education advocates are looking at doing. I think that's all I have to say on this one.
So McCall, is this a recommendation from the group to put forward, or is it just someone's work? What are we looking at here?
So sorry, Jacob. Yes, I think every single one of the ones that we did, that we made changes to these endorsement areas for the administrative license are going to be recommendations to this group to determine if we want to move forward with them. And I can say I know that some of these changes in the language are also ones that have been proposed by some of our education advocates. So I think that they are in line with some of those recommendations to the superintendent as well.
So just looking at this slide, those of us that are here today, does anybody have any comments or follow-up for our subcommittee?
And I did include the other two that McCall had on the next two slides, so they're all here for us to take a look at.
Yes, looking at the other rules that are impacted by these cascading changes is what we end up with.
McCall, if you would, could you please walk us through item D there?
Completion of an accredited educator prep program for K-12 principals. I believe that's the existing language. Is that the one you're looking at? Did you say B or D? Sorry, Nick.
Delta D.
Oh, D. So this was Sharon's change, so I can't speak to exactly what her thought process was behind it. But I think that the 3 semester credits of college courses is already required. So rather than say 3 semester credits of courses in these specific areas, we just say the educator prep program requirements. Again, it'll still be in Montana school law. It'll still be in special ed law. That's my understanding of it. I can look back really quick at some of the conversations we had.
Is the interpretation here that completion of a school counseling program is equivalent to Montana Educator Preparation Program, that they're one and the same?
No, with this one, it would be specific to the administrator prep program. And the educator evaluation was the new piece here. And it's just touching on that piece that we discussed at the last couple of meetings about the concerns that school counselors maybe wouldn't have that same breadth of knowledge in evaluating teachers that a teacher moving into an administrator role would have. And so I think adding that language kind of helps to show that they're going to get additional training specifically in that area. It calls it out specifically.
Thank you, John. So then I'm going to ask another follow-up question, and that is sort of how are B as in boy and D as in Delta connected? Is there overlap there? I'm just having a little bit of confusion making that differentiation between the two there.
I think the accredited piece is speaking to the fact that the prep programs are accredited by the right agencies, and then these calling it out specifically as a Montana Educator program. There would be no reason why that couldn't be truncated into one and say completion of an accredited Montana Educator prep program.
We had a question in the chat. Could someone speak to the reasons for the addition of an endorsement from a supervisor in E?
Again, this was one of Sharon's additions. I don't think, had she been here today, she probably would have been able to explain it better than any of us. So I'm not going to try to speak for her. I apologize.
Yeah,
Jake,
I don't.
Yes.
Oh.
Oh, sorry. This is Jewel. And McCall, I know that Sharon and I had spoken earlier. It was based on the fact that if they did not have the teaching experience, that they could get the recommendation from their immediate supervisor to enroll in a program based on their experience. So that was the reasoning behind that.
I missed that when I read through this earlier this week. So E is actually a recommendation from the university to OPI to license the person. So that letter would make more sense earlier if it's being looked at as an enrollment piece. So having the letter from their immediate supervisor as an entry requirement. By the time we get to E, they've already completed the program.
Dean, go ahead.
Sorry, I had to unmute there. Although it looks like E, it says an and right before E, so it looks like they have to have all of the requirements and a recommendation. Is my interpretation there. Not the way that Jewel stated it there, that it could be an either or.
Dean, I think you're reading that correctly at this point. It currently reads as if a counselor would have to have an additional letter that a teacher would not have to have to obtain the license.
And this is Jewel again. I agree with the fact that it should be moved because it was based on a counselor getting a letter from an immediate supervisor to enroll in a program similar to a teacher who has 3 years of experience enrolling in a program. So moving it to a different location may work.
Would that statement, in terms of moving it, would it be pertinent to our licensure rules, or is it more pertinent to at the university level? Maybe looking at John in terms of acceptance to a program versus something that's in rule.
Yeah, it would probably be more of a program admittance process, which typically will be based, we base some of those on this language. So when we verify the 3 years experience, things like that. So if it were in the rule, I think it would just, this whole rule is talking about, what has to be provided kind of from the licensing standpoint. And that letter, well, I don't disagree with the letter. I think it's fine. We would use that on our end as admission material, not as evidence for the license. So we'd use it to bring them into the program.
So I'm hearing the sentiment is that we strike the new edition that's currently in red in E.
I think that, sorry, Jacob, this is Jewel again. Didn't raise my hand. I should probably turn on my screen as well. But I think that it needs to be there somewhere if that's the intent, so that everyone understands. And it is information that's provided to a counselor who wants to take a path to becoming endorsed as a principal. Somehow that there's that knowledge and it doesn't get lost somewhere, if that is our intent.
Dan, you got your hand up?
Yes. Okay, so and I apologize for my lateness to this and missing the last two, actually my whatever. But honestly, I look at C and I see that with the addition of school counseling, that summarizes everything. I think the additions of everything else in red in D in Delta and Echo, I do not see a reason why that is there. The idea of having D in the first place was to make sure that anyone, attaining licensure for principalship had Montana school law, which you already state in B that the completion of an accredited education program for K-12 principals. So why would we repeat that in Delta? That doesn't make sense to me. And then for counselors, I don't agree with having this additional letter of recommendation when if the recommendation for the endorsement from the appropriate official for an accredited K-12 professional principal program. I think that's just an additional piece that is unnecessary. If the intent was just to get school counselors to the program, I think it's accomplished by adding that in C. But the other language added makes everything confusing, in my opinion.
Al? Val, I can see you unmuted, but we can't hear you.
Hi, sorry about that. I didn't know you recognized me yet. So I'm kind of in agreement with Dan, but I'm kind of just a little bit different route. I'm thinking C, we're going to say, okay, all you need is a minimum of 3 years of teaching. But if you're a counselor, then you need a recommendation from someone else. And so to me, it's almost like, okay, so teachers get a free pass as long as they're a teacher for 3 years. They're okay. But yet if you're a counselor, now you need permission from somebody else to go in there. It's almost like discriminating against school counselors. And I guess anyway, there's my 2 cents.
Jewel, go ahead.
Okay. And I did miss last week, so I apologize. But in our discussions, doesn't this have to do with the fact of the counselor taking a different path into the school counseling position other than through a teaching credential and the pedagogy and all of that comes with it, that path? And that was the reason that there were 4 denials previously, is because they didn't have teaching experience or did not have a good understanding. That's how this conversation started. Not that they took the path from a teacher to a counselor to administrator. They came into a school through an alternative path. They became a counselor and then they want to become an administrator. Is that correct, according to all of our conversations?
Yes, Jewel, that is correct.
I wouldn't say they came in on an alternative path because 2 of those are from MSU. And they did go into our leadership program, completed our program, but they did not have the 3 years teaching experience. So those are traditional programs, the same that every other administrator licensed in from MSU completes. So they, I wouldn't say that those 2 were alternatives.
Dean, go ahead.
I also recall having a discussion about how there are some counselors who have not been teachers, but they fall on a collective bargaining agreement as a teacher and they're evaluated as a teacher. And so that was also something we were going to look at here as well. So, and I think that may have been where the letter from a supervisor came in, that they could vouch that yes, this counselor has been supervised and evaluated as a teacher and have experienced what teacher evaluation is like, so that they'd be able to do it as an administrator. I think I recall something like that last week.
Yeah, not having been a part of last week's conversation, looking at the language, Jewel, and this is where I asked this question, it reads to me that it's less about getting into the program and more about saying prior to getting a license, someone who is a school administrator believes this counselor, in lieu of having 3 years teaching experience, has the capability to do this. And that would be the purpose of the letter that is put here.
That is correct, Jacob. That was the intent or the conversation.
So if that adds any clarity to anybody, is there additional comments about this language, keeping it in or still continue to strike it? Go ahead, Diane. Val, we'll get to you after Diane.
No problem.
Thank you. Thanks for being recognized. My question relates to, I guess I would like to talk to the preparation, John. In terms of evaluation and experience therein or teaching experience, can you tell me your administrator's program and what type of introduction folks might get if they haven't been included in the collective bargaining agreement and haven't been evaluated the same? Is there adequate coverage in your program for administrators that would allow a person who had not had teaching experience, had come in through an alternative route, to get the evaluation information from the pedagogy provided in your program for administrators?
I think in order to speak to the depth of what they receive, we'd have to hear from the faculty who teach in that program. So Tina Verslin, which most of you know, is our head faculty member for that program. And I think if we wanted to talk about what's covered in her courses, we'd have to have her come on and really go in depth. It's the same preparation that the principals in Montana, they're receiving now. I mean, it covers the same amount of information. So we don't have one program for school counselors and one for teachers. It's all the same program. But as far as the depth of what she covers, I can't speak to that.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Val. Val, did you have a comment?
Oh, sorry. Somebody must have muted me again. I totally understand where Joel's coming from and totally agree. Is there a way we could move that up from E and place it somewhere by C so that we knew in lieu of the 3 years teaching, we get the other endorsement from their supervisor or whatever? Would it be better if we had that up by C?
So Gary says yes, he thinks by C would be better. While everyone's thinking, I dropped in the chat the rule from chapter 58, accreditation of preparation programs related to principal programs. And quick summary is it doesn't mention teacher evaluation specifically, but it talks about supervising instruction in a couple different bullet points that would overarchingly cover, if you think about supervise as evaluation, the components of what would be in an evaluation, but it doesn't mention them specifically. It does specifically mention that an accredited program will contain the law classes, so.
This is Jewel again. I think that we should try to move that up by C and then have a conversation later on about it. I think that we are getting mired down because if there were only 4 that this really impacted, maybe we need to either move it, see what that looks like, take a vote on it. Just my thoughts.
I think we can give the recommendation to the group and maybe they can make some additional recommendations and bring back next week. It seems like we've got a couple different things at this point, either combining it with C or there's also a potential option of breaking out a specific rule for counseling, something to the effect of a minimum of 3 years as a school counselor and this letter, if it makes it more clear too. Is something to work on. How did we feel about D? Is there any recommendations for the group in terms of do we include the language about educator evaluation specifically, or should we strike it out? Just any kind of firm recommendation for them as we send them off?
This is Jewel again. I do think, like Dan mentioned previously, school law is specifically listed in there. And based on our previous conversations and all of the comments that were provided, I think that the evaluation is an important component that we had a discussion about. So it seemed to be important to the group. So that's what I got from our previous conversations. And I think it's a very, very important part of being an effective administrator, and especially from someone who has taken an alternative. I keep saying alternative path for a lack of a better word, but who doesn't have the 3 years of teaching experience, but does have counseling experience.
Dan?
I think Nick had his hand up too. Nick, were you?
Who do you want to go? It doesn't matter.
Dan, go first, and then we'll go to Nick.
Okay, all right. Yeah, so I would believe that when you, as a counselor, you're getting evaluated on your lessons that you give in a classroom setting. That's how I evaluate a counselor. So it's still just kind of, this language seems to be excessive in E and in D, quite simply because, we're talking about classroom pedagogy, and counselors get that just as much as a classroom teacher, while the majority of the position may be centered on individualized instruction. So I think we just, I still just have a hard time, and I would prefer the new language just be struck.
And Nick?
Yeah, Dan, I absolutely concur. I'm afraid that it potentially could add an additional step for someone that did not come through a Montana Educator Preparation Program, that they would then, in addition to Montana school law, including special education law, I'm afraid that this phrase also includes that they need to take a Montana Educator Preparation Educator Evaluation course, even if they have received similar training not in education. So I too believe it probably best served to be struck from D.
Does anyone have any knowledge if there is a specific educator evaluation class? I know, John, you mentioned that it's unclear, but does anybody know who may have went through a program recently or engaged with anybody?
I know I'm a co-facilitator, but I went through Tina's program at MSU. And although I had 8, maybe 9 years of teaching under my belt when I went through the Ed Leadership program, there wasn't a specific course on evaluation. That training I got in my undergrad and first master's degree on, and not in an administrative role. I can, oh, can I just thought we did look at like the Danielson model in some of the coursework in ed leadership, but it wasn't that, it was a specific course is I guess what I should say also.
Go ahead, Jill.
I think that there needs to be some discussion because I believe in the teams report, and part of the accreditation in the past has been based on EPAS or using the Danielson model. So, I mean, if that's not of any consequence going forward, then yes, we can strike the language. But if it is something that we are going to continue to focus on at the, from the OPI end and the accreditation process, I think we need to have a discussion about it. And I guess that would come from you, Crystal. And I know that Linda taught many classes during MEA and at different points on all of that. So I guess where we're going forward would have an effect on this conversation.
So in sum, for our C2A group to take back, what I hear is 2 points here. One of which is we think it's essential for anyone, as the wording is, who's going to become a principal to have exposure to educator evaluation. Whether it currently reads whether you're a teacher or a school counselor, we think it's essential for a school counselor who may not have had as great of experience to it. One key piece of the concern that I heard Nick express was, does it add a layer of complexity specifically for someone who's coming from out of state if they had to take a class on a Montana educator preparation program class on educator evaluation? Is that possible? And would that be something that could occur if they could just go take that class? So potentially something to investigate. Dan, do you still have your hand up, or did I just not lower it?
Oh, I think I didn't lower it, or you didn't lower it, either one. Yeah, oops, there we go.
So go ahead.
So I want to go back to what I said, and I have John here so he can help me out, but I have all my notebooks and things from when I took the courses, and I actually am going to take back what I said. And there's a course at MSU called Supervision of Instruction by Tina Versland, and that's exactly what it is. So I apologize. It's been a few years since I finished my degree. So it's completely foundational in terms of that supervision piece. So that would be the course. And that John just put it in the chat also. I have it's an old syllabus, but I have all of it here to say that I would say this would be a specific course that would go over that supervision piece. So I apologize for the confusion, but there is such course.
So Jewel, does a hub class, would that count as a Montana educator preparation program requirement under the rule? Does it typically?
No, I'm just giving another option thinking about it, because I do think that there are would be an opportunity for learning hub courses. And so that might address what Nick said and Dan said, somebody coming from out of state. But if we're going to look at EPAS or, that for accreditation and the teams report, possibly putting something in the learning hub like Indian Ed for All is done. Just a thought.
Good point, Jill. So that, there is other language specifically for out-of-state licensees around the Indian Education for All class they have to take as well. So it's outside of a university setting. Dean.
Yeah, I think this is great discussion. I think it really comes down to not necessarily if an aspiring principal understands EPAS and the teams report, all of that. I think they just need to understand what teacher evaluation is and have experienced it to some degree, because a lot of those things I think will be taught at, you know, SAM trainings and MCEL and like you said, the Learning Hub, Jewel. Yeah, I think they just need to, I think teachers just want to know that their principal has been taught or understand how to do evaluation. So I think that's probably the important thing.
Okay, so if it is agreeable to the group, I think we can send the counselor to administrator subgroup back off with the task of taking in all of the feedback that they received today and continuing to refine the work that they've done to this point, and then bring it back to the larger group next week. And as a facilitator, I think next week we will dedicate as much time as we need to come to some sort of consensus on the language around this so that we can move forward. So if it's possible, if the counselor to administrator group has anything earlier in the week, if we could share it with the larger group so everybody can get a preview too and come in with some prepared thoughts or maybe even get some feedback before then, that also would be beneficial. So our goal is to wrap up at least 417 next week. And then if we can move on, Crystal, and look at the next couple slides, because I think we'll want to see if there's any other implications on the other rules that we want to look at. So this is the superintendent endorsement. There was the language of added a Montana Educator Preparation Program requirements versus 3 credits. Dan, you're talking about on the previous rule, 417?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I was.
And Jacob, could I just
Go ahead.
say something quickly, please? So if we want to finish 417 up next week, looking at that language, is there a way to get a summary, or at what point would Crystal or any of you be having a conversation with Elsie to make sure that we are not spinning our wheels if she is in agreement with making this as a recommendation, so that we are touching base frequently, someone from OPI or you, Jacob or Eric, so that we know what the thought process is there, and that we move forward. And so who or when that might occur.
Jewel, I am going to ask Tristan. Tristan, I am certain that Cheryl sees your notes and that she's having discussions with Elsie about this. That is from the comp center point of view, that's we're just sort of facilitating and we're not in those discussions. And Crystal, is that sort of how it's operating on your end as well?
So far, yes, but the superintendent did tell me that she would like to start meeting with me on, the process and how recommendations are going once we get going with it. So there's no set date. I think I could say that we have something and bring it to her if that's what the task force would like. But I would think that would be more in the realms of us having an actual recommendation. But I'm willing to request or ask anything that the committee thinks. So Tristan, I see, has her hand up, so she might know more.
Yeah, so Crystal and the group, my personal opinion on this is if we don't have a firm recommendation we want to take to the superintendent, I can talk to the deputy and have her speak with the superintendent just so we can get a feel if they're going in the right direction. So once the revisions to the revision is made, I could take that to the deputy and then she can take it to the superintendent.
Well, I do hear from the group. I think what we want to make sure is that to the greatest extent possible, that the vision that the superintendent has for the work group is known. That's also useful input. So Tristan, if you happen to have any conversation around that, that could be very beneficial.
Yeah, Jacob, I can definitely have conversations like that soon.
So do you want to go forward again?
Yes, let's go ahead and move on to the next one. I think in the next one, it's that language of Montana Education Preparation Program requirements is the key piece, and that just really seems to make it more open than just saying 3 credits of each. It's the completion of that. I think we can look at that as we move forward. The next slide. The Class 3 administrative in general just added the applicability of having a counseling license, which is in line with our 417. Specified the differences in the 2 different licenses, 1, 2, or 5 teaching or the Class 6 counseling. That seems pretty straightforward. Next slide. This was going to guide our discussion, I think.
Yes, so as we're discussing and, conversations come up, it's been important as I've looked at past processes and old ARM, which I know so many of you have been involved in. It's just there's questions to pose and, conversations that can come from that. So there are 3 questions here that I have. They all have to do with that first revision. So the first is, does it have to be a master's degree? What if it's an endorsement? So I'm going to just say all the questions, and then anyone that wants to contribute to the conversation, go ahead and you can say whatever you'd like. And again, these are just questions to pose. The second is, does it have to be in an accredited program? As we get into our reciprocity discussion in the report that Eric helped with, he had some information there on accredited versus non-accredited. And then the third question is, does it have to be a Montana specific EPP? What if it's an out-of-state ed prep program that has school law, school finance, and such? So those are the 3 questions that I wanted to pose to kind of bring more conversation into the revisions.
Does anybody have any thoughts about that specifically right now?
We could also, and I know that in chapter 58, Tristan said that they've had questions like that posed and people want more time to think on it so that they have that for homework for the next week. So what we can do, if no one has anything strong to say right now, we can put that in as part of homework, and especially for those who are not here this week, for next week, and we can, start the discussion off of that as well. But I see John's hands up, so go ahead, John.
Yeah, not looking to answer any questions, but just some clarification. This says counselor to administrator pathway, but is this question about accredited programs, master's degree, Montana EPP, is this specific only to counselors, or is this specific to that administrator language in general?
I think it would have to be both, right? So if we change, if it was said to change here, then that would open a can of worms to looking at all pathways. So I think you're right, John, but again, just questions to consider. And it's not, I'm not, asking for the change, but I just wanted to pose some thoughts on, and as we, like I said, go into the reciprocity part, different areas to look at. So if there's no real strong feelings right now, I think we could add this to homework and move on, but Jacob, I'll let you make that decision.
Well, there's certainly, I recommend that people consider them. We, at this point, did not get any input from the group itself that they had concerns around this. Dan, go ahead. Diane, you have your hand up.
I thought you said Dan. I am interested in accredited programs, more so than other programs. I'd be willing to listen to issues surrounding that. I'd have to know more to change my mind, however.
Okay, so now can I go?
Please do, Dan, go ahead.
Yeah, all right, okay, yeah, no, that's fine. I had muted myself. I was talking and nobody was hearing what I was saying. But anyway, yes, I do have concerns with the Montana specific educator prep program. We cannot continue to pigeonhole ourselves to where we have a smaller candidate pool available to us. So I think it all could be done without an entire program.
So on this end, I have confusion around the language specifically of Montana Educator Preparation Program requirements. I read that as saying that any applicant must also engage in these things that are a requirement of a Montana specific program that are, so you have to take a school law class, a school finance class, and something around collective bargaining. I don't read it as you have to go through an entire Montana program, but I do read it as being limiting. Like the question is, does someone have to have a specific class in Montana school law, or does it just have to be school law? That's the big question for me.
Go ahead, John. You're
I
there.
can tell you that we've had discussions on this with our folks as well, and there has been some pretty consistent views that the Montana school law, school finance, and collective bargaining, specific to how things work in Montana versus maybe a generic oversight of how they could work in theory in any state, or how it may work in South Carolina versus Montana. And I know that those faculty have been looking at how to package these things so that it wouldn't necessarily have to be 3 courses to cover all those topics. So that's something they've been talking about. But there has been a pretty strong voice that they've heard that the administrators do need to really understand specifically how school law, finance, and collective bargaining work in Montana compared to other places.
And so things that we do see in licensure and where we get some questions are from out-of-state folks who have their admin degree or a license from another state and have taken a law course or a finance course, and now they're being told that they have to take it again specific to Montana. So that's where this question's stemming from. And John just explained why, but I was just giving a little bit more background. And we do have some things in the chat. I want to go back to Heather said, I don't have a raise hand button, but I feel that adding the specific Montana Educator Preparation Program verbiage is a mistake, as we already have a shortage in our state. So similar to what Dan said, but that yes, a master's and yes, accredited. And then Dan. So if I don't need to read it all to you, you guys are very capable. I just wanted you to recognize there is a lot going on in the chat as well.
Yeah, and the comments in the chat seem to summarize too, for consideration, something that Jewel brought up in that the delivery of the courses, is there flexibility there potentially? Does it have to be a university-based course, or could it be something that's offered through the OPI professional development with some sort of, it just offered through that? There could be on there whether or not they have to actually take a pass it quiz at the end or something like that as well. But that's what people seem to be chatting about. John, I think if Tina could attend the meeting, that would be very helpful to have that context.
I will ask her. I will invite her. And John, John, you can as well, but I will invite her from the OPI.
This is Jewel. And so we would have to make a decision on the previous slide or 417 regarding the evaluation portion and whatever the subcommittee had a discussion about, but there could be the possibility that if the committee chose to decide, we would add that as the fourth one. And it could possibly be an endorsement like Jacob was just talking, but specific to Montana or moving from counselor to administrator. Just clarifying that we would probably have to do that based on our previous conversation or making a decision about that part. Is that correct? Or is that your thought, Crystal or Jacob?
Yes, I see Crystal shaking her head too. I think that's it. But at this point, I place it in the hands of our subcommittee to take in all of the feedback and think about possible revisions that captures sort of the gist of this conversation, and is something that we can come back and have further conversation about. Go ahead, McCall.
Thanks, Jacob. I know that John is on here, but I think he may be the only other person from our subcommittee who's here at this time. But are there others who might want to participate? I can ask Tristan to add them to that Google Doc and maybe allow us to have a better conversation offline. So if others are interested in participating, maybe let Tristan know. That'd be very helpful to us. Thank you.
Somebody help me out. Dan, I don't think you are. We only have the one subcommittee right now. So I don't think anyone else has any official designations at this point.
That is
There might
correct.
be, there could be some more before the meeting's over today in the next half hour.
I was hoping to get there, but I'm not sure if we're going to get there.
I think Dan should join the subcommittee.
Thanks, Jewel. And I'd be happy to. I'm fine with that.
So going forward, I think we can move on and let's, for the sake of vote, take a vote, please, if we want to consider revisions for the subcommittee's recommendations. So you're going to vote yes if you see that we need to make revisions to what the subcommittee gave. Thumbs up, hands raised, whatever you can do.
Everybody just put a hand up. I think we had consensus that we want to move forward. I do not feel that we don't. So for the sake of having it recorded.
Thank you.
Everybody who's there. If anybody does dissent, you could say something out loud if you wish. Again, we're just letting the subcommittee go back to work with add some additional revisions. I don't hear anybody saying no, so feel like we're good. Tristan, can you lower everybody's hand? Is that an option you have as host?
Yes, it is. I can do that.
Please, and thank you. All right, Crystal, I'm mixing up my names now. Crystal, can we move to the next slide, please?
And Jewel, yes, you can be. So thank you. Tristan, please add Jewel to the subcommittee as well. Sorry.
No worries. So reciprocity. Hopefully everyone had a chance to look through the report. We'll give a quick overview of what was in that report. But if you did not look at it and you have not yet found it, please visit our website where it is included in the resources, and make sure that prior to our next couple meetings that you get a chance to really look through this report in depth. It really, the gist of it is it looked at reciprocity across the United States, different policies in different states, and then looked at the Montana current policies and did some comparisons of where we saw gaps, some opportunities for adjustments. This was completed by the Region 17 Comprehensive Center earlier in 2020 as we initiated this work. But some background context for Montana. In the 70s, there was some legislation passed allowing the Montana Superintendent of Instruction to enter into reciprocity agreements with other states. There were some of those agreements implemented with Idaho, South Dakota, and Utah for full reciprocity. But in 2002, those agreements were ended due to concerns of lax standards for teacher quality. And since then, there have not been any agreements put in place. So reciprocity is not without precedent in Montana, but it currently does not exist in terms of full reciprocity, meaning you show up with a license from Idaho and Montana says you're good to go, is the point of it. But on the next slide, you'll see that as we did this work, we looked at across the state, several interviews with OPI staff and licensing were conducted. And what was concluded by those who put together the report is not myself. Eric was heavily involved. So Eric, if something is said incorrect, please jump in. There are some requirements potentially in Montana that deter out-of-state educators from obtaining credentials in the state. And thinking about some level of reciprocity could impact licensing. As for example, last year alone, there were 118 emergency authorization of employments issued. Now, Crystal, of this 118, do we know how many of those were to teachers who came from out of state with licenses?
That's a great question. I don't think so, but I can look into that. And actually, as you're talking, I could try to pull up the report right now. So I could maybe get back to you in the meeting. If not, I will get that information for the next one.
We do know in my limited connection with previous work we've done and through this work, anecdotally, we hear frequently from principals, Dan, superintendents such as Dan and others who run into roadblocks with out-of-state teachers. And so, Crystal, I know I'm asking a lot of you. If you hit the next slide, there we go. Specifically in the report, which is hard to see here, but there's a table. It's table 3, and it broke down some broad areas where there were requirements in Montana for out-of-state candidates and places for adjustment. And those, I'm going to see if I can share my screen here quickly.
I could probably just let me just pull up the report. It might be more clear and I might be able to enlarge. Give me 1 second.
But as she does that, so as you look at the report, and if you haven't yet, or if you have, the key place to go is table 3. That's where the meat of the information is at. That is most useful to the work that we are doing. And as she pulls it up, I'd like to open the floor to talk about reciprocity in terms of your experience. What do you see are places where adjustments could occur? What are your thoughts about reciprocity? Do you have any specific ideas right now? So I'd love to just hear from the group as we move forward and dig into this. Reciprocity. That's the topic. Go.
Jacob, this is Jewel, and I'll just start. I believe a lot of the emergency authorizations come from those that just have like bachelor's degrees and are interested in getting into a program to finish an education degree, or they've used it as a second career, something like that. That was some of the discussions early on, trying to get individuals into the classrooms that superintendents want there to teach children. And so I don't know so much if it had to do with educators coming from out of state into Montana. Anyway, just starting the conversation.
Thanks, Joel, and we'll do our best to get those specifics next week to help inform it as well.
Can you see it better now, Jacob?
It is bigger. Thank you, Crystal.
Okay.
That's helpful on my end. At least I can see.
Great.
So the issues / areas of focus that were identified in this table, and our key points for our discussion are coursework, requirements in the rules around coursework for out-of-state applicants, experience. You can just scroll on down, then we'll come back up. Oh, she's rotating like Dr. Evil. Assessments, and then some special reciprocity for advanced credentials, special reciprocity for military spouses, and alternative pathways. So those are the areas of consideration and looking across the other states, we found where Montana had some opportunity to make adjustments that could help facilitate reciprocity for teachers. And again, I'm going to ask you to sort of dig into that table to help guide our discussion as we move forward. But again, I'd love to hear from anybody about anything those topics or reciprocity issues that you've dealt with, things in the rule that currently exist that you'd like to see tackled by the group.
Yeah, this Phil. This military spouses, I thought there was a federal law that was passed during the Obama administration requiring, I guess, a more of a streamlined avenue for military spouses, in order to get licensing. That's not addressed in this table. Are you aware of anything on that?
I am not, but I am not the expert. McCall, going to get to you, but Eric, you have your hand up. Can you your comment or speak to this question?
Yes, I think we'll want to take a closer look at that specific question around military spouses. Some of the data we had was a little bit old as we were putting this together, so possibly there's been some superseding developments. But I did, just as a housekeeping matter, want to point, if Crystal could scroll a little bit more at the very end of this table. Endorsement areas they're not quite as big of a consideration in reciprocity, but there may be some opportunity there to, in terms of housekeeping, to look at what surrounding states require, and if there are small wins that can be had by reducing friction for out-of-state educators, if there are small adjustments in endorsement areas to get Montana to be in alignment with the endorsement areas of other states. So I just wanted to make sure that last row in the table was not overlooked.
Go ahead, McCall.
Thanks, Crystal. Eric, I'm glad you just brought that up because I had a question on that. So if we were to change some of the endorsement areas to better align with those, say, around us in Montana, and I'm totally just curious, what would that do to those who hold specific endorsements in Montana? Would we grandfather them in? Will we just move their endorsement area? That was one of the questions I had. And then specific to the special reciprocity areas, for the advanced credential part, we do have the national board certification piece that allows for folks who have national board certification to have basically reciprocity in Montana. And then on the military spouse piece, I'd be interested to learn more about that. It sounds like Dan knows more. But we do have that provisional license that allows you an extra year to take the praxis. And that actually came from conversations with folks in Great Falls near the military base for spouses who were coming in maybe in the middle of a school year and hadn't taken the praxis. They can now get on the provisional and take that praxis the next time it comes around. Obviously, certainly not as robust as some of these other states, but that was a thought I had and just wanted to see if I was on the right path or if others had those same thoughts.
Thank you, McCall. So I'm going to let John speak, and then Heather has got something to say, and then we can circle back in this conversation.
Yeah, I just had a question. One of the things I don't see covered on here is the NASDAQ interstate agreement. Does Montana no longer participate in that? So there's the NASDAQ agreement that basically says if you're licensed in another state, you can come into Montana, get a provisional license while you meet whatever requirements are in place for out-of-state candidates while you, so you're able to teach while you meet those requirements, whether it's a praxis test or, whatever that might be.
Yes, we are, John.
Heather, can you go ahead?
Thank you. So I just wanted to say, first of all, that reciprocity reading was really great. I really appreciated it. And I especially appreciate the potential adjustments that are there. To speak a little bit from the field, however, I've had a teacher just this past year who was nationally board certified, and the OPI did not want to license her easily with reciprocity. I had to contact Cheryl Allen, and she was very helpful in that process, but that is not something that's recognized as a reciprocity issue. So just as a point of clarification from the field on that, that is something that I would like to see, however, because that is no easy feat for teachers who have completed that. This particular teacher also came out of Wyoming with 20 years of experience, and the OPI did not want to license her. So there's a lot of issues, not just that one, but that's a problem to me. And so speaking from the field, there are a lot of issues that we really need to think about, and reciprocity is huge. I know that last week when we met, there was a gal who was really concerned about it, and I would like to know what the specific concerns are about reciprocity with other states. I think that we have a lot of room for improvement in our state on recognizing other states' preparations of teachers. And if a teacher has successfully taught in another state for 3 years, but especially if they have double digits of experience, I think we need to recognize that and license them without a lot of hoops. So thank you for the reciprocity read. It was great. I really hope that we can address all of the potential adjustments as a group, because I think that is a step in the right direction for our state and our students.
Jacob, can I go next? I just want to speak to what Heather said, and being in this role now as the Ed Licensure Director, we too feel that way. So when it's said that the OPI wouldn't issue the license, or we're not recognizing, the OPI is following ARM. My licensure specialists are diligently reading ARM, looking at ARM, and that is why, if they ever turn something away, it's coming from that, and that's why this committee is so important. So the OPI is not handpicking decisions. It's the licensure specialists are trained to look at the ARM. So I have to defend them a little bit, just how Heather was saying it that way. I just wanted to be sure it was clear that we're not turning people away based on anything other than what is given to us from the Board of Public Ed.
And just to be clear, not a personal attack at all on the OPI, because they did help her get licensed, as well as a couple of other teachers in the past that have also had this problem. But I think the problem is with ARM, and that's why we're all here trying to improve that for our state and our kids in our schools. I think a lot of us are passionate about that, and the fact that OPI has started this conversation is huge. But I think we need to be really transparent with what the problems are and not dance around them too much.
I Completely concur. And I wasn't taking a personal offense. I just wanted it to be clear that we follow what, the arm that's given to us. But I can tell you Deputy Superintendent Allen feels the same way. We meet weekly on licensure committee where some of these cases come up, just weekly, and we have to bring them to the board. With unusual cases. So it is an issue. And I'm so grateful that we have this time as a task force to try and look at all these topics. So thank you, Heather. I appreciate it.
Dean, go ahead.
I thought I read somewhere in Reciprocity that national board certification was accepted. Am I not understanding that correct?
I would like some clarification on that myself. There is language in the Class 2 Standards Teaching License 57410 that says a current license from the National Board for Professional Teaching Standards in an area approved for endorsement in Montana. Given that language, what are the difficulties that we run into with anybody who's national board certified?
Jacob, I think the problem is the endorsement area because it has to be a Montana endorsement area. I think that tends to be the issue, not necessarily the national board area, probably.
McCall, yes, I would say that's correct.
Yeah, and just speaking from experience with my teacher that I was speaking about, there's not a lot of things that align with our Montana endorsements the way that nationally board certified teachers are certified. And so that language doesn't speak to each other, and that makes it harder for the people in the licensure office to interpret. So that's part of the issue. Their job is already hard enough with the number of people they're trying to get licensed, but when we add that difficulty of language in, that's an issue for them especially.
Diane?
Yes, I'm particularly interested in what we might do for our nationally board certified teachers and how we might seek greater alignment or some consideration in the language so that those folks who have gone through that rigorous program and want to come to Montana have a pathway to do it. So I would like some further examination of that maybe before the next meeting. What are some possible suggestions to make that go more smoothly?
Any thoughts from anyone about that? While not specifically said, there was it has been implied that it could go more smoothly if the endorsement language was struck from the rule.
This is Diane again. I understand that, and I'm thinking in general, as we're looking at our endorsements as a possible source, a bottleneck, that we could look at the national board endorsement areas as perhaps one of the templates we review for not only reciprocity for national board certification, but looking ahead to see if any of those would work for other areas in Montana as well. That was my thought when I mentioned that.
Thank you, Diane. I am dropping the Montana endorsement areas into the chat if anybody's not familiar. I was not. It's number 8 in Rule 102. And to circle back to another point that McCall made about the provisional license for military families, that, don't let me mistake this, McCall, but I think that is in place in Montana. And I think that is what it speaks to in the table, and that there's not full reciprocity. And then I dropped a link into the chat earlier that gave a quick summary from about the federal report and request and how that ties together. Dan, did you have anything about that specifically, the military reciprocity that could add to that conversation?
No, not specifically. I mean, I think whoever was speaking before had it down. I mean, that it is something that was brought about in 2010 by the Obama administration, brought forth, and that the reciprocity for military spouses, not just in education, but all other forms of professional licensing, have a reciprocity by the states that signed on, and Montana did sign on, and then later added the change, probably around 2012 in Montana, maybe 14, I can't remember exactly when, but that had to be substantially equivalent to the Montana requirements. So that was an addition from a point in time where Montana evidently had a lot more teachers.
So we have about 9 minutes left. Anything in this table specifically that we would like to chat about before we wrap up for today? Dan, do you have something else?
Yeah, I just, praxis exams and that praxis piece seems to be a rather big part in our current, our current arm. But yet, if a teacher from out of state actually passes that praxis, then they're still given a list of other hoops they have to jump through. And yet, praxis exam, that qualifying score is really the final piece. And so my real concern is either we use the praxis exam as the standard of equivalency that it's supposed to be in all situations, or we eliminate it completely. And that's what I have to say about that.
Thank you, Dan. So that's, and of course, also addressed in our table, assessments, making the statement that Montana is one of 43 states that require out-of-state teacher candidates to take an additional assessment. In this case, Montana requires proof of a minimum passing score on the praxis.
Yes. And once they meet that minimum passing score, grant them a license.
And I have a question about this, just for context. So it doesn't state that they have to take the praxis again necessarily, but do we see that a lot of teachers come in unable to don't have their score with them or proof of their score, so then they end up having to take it again? Is that a situation, or is it sort of mixed bag, or do we know? John? John, you can go ahead, then Christine.
I was trying to unmute myself by clicking my hand raised, so that didn't work well. Praxis is not the only test provider, and a lot of other states use other providers, so it isn't a one-for-one. So I've been licensed in a number of other states, and they use Pearson assessments, for example. And a lot of them have moved to state-specific tests. I think there's like 27 or 30 some states now that have state-specific tests, and they don't really align directly to the praxis that we offer. So it's not that they don't have a test or haven't taken a test, they just haven't taken the test that we require of our candidates.
Go ahead, Christine.
To further explain, if you bring somebody in from out of country, like the Philippines, they definitely don't have the praxis, and it takes them quite a while to pass the praxis. So if they can pass the praxis, they've definitely demonstrated a knowledge of our language and several other things. I like having the praxis on there. It's all of the other hoops that we require, like Dan said, that make it more just very difficult, because we're having them take the praxis. They're specific to their content. It should be enough.
So we talked a lot about teacher quality at the beginning, and I know I'm going to bring in a little bit that's happening in the Chapter 58 discussion to put before the group to consider. And this is going to be a big question, so we don't have to dive in today, but is the praxis a measure of teacher quality? Really looking at, I think that really thinking about its essentialness. So like Christine, you touched on it a little bit. You thought it was a good, what I heard you say was you felt it was good that, that they could demonstrate their content knowledge to provide that. So there's always that discussion of essentialness. Christine, you're muted if you're trying to talk. I can't tell.
Jacob, this is Jewel. So
Jewel.
what are some of you saying, like if somebody was endorsed K-8 and they were teaching middle school 6, 7, and 8 and could pass the praxis in a lot of different subject areas, that they could teach in any of those subject areas? Or are you saying specifically for their degree? What if it's biology, chemistry, broad field social science? I'm just throwing some out there. What's the thought on that?
Go ahead, Christine.
Jewel, I think that was really a very appropriate thought, because you have a teacher who can teach in the classroom and has that pedagogy down, and they often even have taught it in your K-8 in a specific 5-6 classroom, but then they can't get endorsed to teach math or to, because you need Algebra 1. And so we're K-8, and Algebra 1 doesn't, I teach it on K-8, but I can't get it to count for accreditation at the high school level. And that's a very specific case. But what about schools that are K-12 that deal with finding the teacher with the exact strength in their content, but have taught many years and could pass the content praxis for their level?
So Dean, go ahead, and then Heather, you have a question, and then we're going to need to wrap up for the day and honor our time frame. Go ahead, Dean.
Okay, just to put my 2 cents in, I think another way to look at it, I have a daughter-in-law that just finished doing all the nursing boards and everything, and I'm kind of along the line with the other people that said, someone can pass a praxis. That praxis is supposed to be a valid instrument that demonstrates knowledge of teaching. I think once you get to that point, then your principal or your administrator in the hiring process can determine whether they're a good fit as far as relationships, personality, skills, ability to be able to teach. But we know based on this valid test that they have the skills necessary to be able to teach that content area. So I am in agreement with the whole praxis conversation as well.
Heather, was your question answered? I think we'll continue to add context to it, but.
Well, yes and no, I guess. I mean, I know that we require it for licensure, but I mean, going back eons ago, I had to take that as part of my teacher prep program to even get into that piece of the program. So is that not something that institutions are still requiring? And if it is, can't the institution then be the one making that recommendation? Why do we have to have that as an extra step in the licensure process? I guess I'm just trying to understand the evolution of that over time.
Go ahead, John. Last comment.
Yeah, I was just gonna speak to that. So we do require the praxis, but it is a licensure requirement, not a program requirement. So students have until they apply for licensure to pass that test. When we make a recommendation, we are recommending based on the passing of the praxis. But in Montana, we have a form called the MAC. It's the Montana Assessment of Content Knowledge. This was a form, I believe, developed around the time of highly qualified. And so we are verifying content knowledge first through their content GPA, second through the praxis, and the praxis doesn't measure their testing or teaching ability. It's only their content knowledge in the subject area. And then 3, we are verifying content knowledge through an assessment given by their cooperating teacher during student teaching. So when we make a recommendation, it's based on those 3 things. Of course, we're also talking about the fact that they've completed our program, had all the pedagogy, things like that. But those are the 3 major areas that we're doing specifically for OPI.
Crystal, you go ahead.
No, I just think that could lead into an even bigger conversation, what John just brought up with the MAC. So I think there's a lot of food for thought and a lot to consider, and we've sort of opened that can of worms of so many different areas of reciprocity that we want to look at. So my thought was that if there's something that you seem passionate about, like Diane was saying about her, I think she said endorsement, or so, if there's something that you want to learn more about, or in the report you want to really understand, if you could come to the next meeting, definitely reading the reciprocity report. If there's any areas that you want to look at, like the military spouse, and see what other states do, sort of do a little research on your end. We have the report. I can get as much information needed as well in the time being, but anything else that can contribute to the conversation, I think would be important. Also know that we have so many that aren't here today. It's a committee of 25, and I think there's 14 here today. So, we want to definitely have their voices next week as well. So I hate to say to be continued, but I think that, we just need to kind of keep the ball rolling with this. But obviously we see that we have some strong feelings and some real desire to see some changes within reciprocity. And yes, Dan, I will get that to you. I saw that. I'm going to skip a few ahead. I know we're running over time, and I apologize. So there will be a Google form for you to put in any thoughts or ideas on these. I call them the big buckets about reciprocity that were in that report. And we'll put it in the homework site. Anything that you want to contribute, questions that you have. So prior to the meeting, we have some background and places to start with the conversation. I think would be good. Jacob, anything else?
No, we again, we'll solicit some feedback. If you have thoughts throughout the week, we'll have a form for you to give that to us. That looks like the chart that Crystal just showed on the other page. If you don't have the report, be sure and reach out to us, and we'll get that to you directly. So I know Crystal's got it noted, and Tristan, we need to get it to Dan just via PDF because the link's not working for him. And then next week, we're going to finalize our counselor language. So our C2A group, you guys still have a task to take in the feedback, and some new people added to that group to make those decisions. Depending on how long that takes to finalize that, because we're not leaving it until we get it done next week. And then we'll dig back into reciprocity off on the 15th. Then we see where we are. So thank you again to everybody. Have a great holiday weekend, and we'll see you again next week.
Thank you. Bye-bye.